Underrated is a word that I often use for Casper Ruud. He's been in multiple Grand Slam finals, been as high as #2 in the world, and is a consistent mainstay at the top of the game on the ATP Tour. And one of the parts of his game that's pretty underrated is his serve and his serve mechanics. So today we're going to cover 5 tips that you can copy that will hopefully have you serving a little bit more like Casper Ruud and a little bit more efficiently. So here we go, we'll watch one in real time, then we'll break it down. Okay, the first thing that I want you to pay attention to is what he does with his body weight. So I see a lot of club and recreational players struggle with what to do with their bodies at the start of the service motion. One of the most common things that we see is players will essentially get into a small squat and then they'll toss the ball up. A fix for that is just thinking about 2 bathroom scales. So I learned this via Great Base Tennis, and I believe it comes from Dennis Vandermeer. If we had 2 bathroom scales, bathroom scale 1 and bathroom scale 2, you would notice that at the start of the service motion, the weight is on bathroom scale 1, or the one at the start. Then the player will rock or shift their weight back onto bathroom scale 2. And then you'll toss the ball, load, and then you will go. So why I recommend club and recreational players, even if you are using platform stance, follow something similar to this, is that it just gives you something concrete to do with your body, as opposed to not knowing what to do and putting in a squat before you toss the ball. So if you're filming yourself, start with your weight on that front foot here. So this is scale 1, and then take it back to scale 2. And then from there, you're going to turn, toss, and hit the ball. Second component that I want you to emulate and learn from, and that is the height of Casper Ruud's ball toss. So lots of information out there on the ball toss, but one of the things that I always recommend is you want a ball toss that's not too high. Ryan Reid at 2 Minute Tennis has a great toss to contact timer where he basically puts down a couple numbers where he says between 0.6 to 0.9 seconds. That's the range you want to be in from when the ball leaves your hand to the contact. So if we look at Casper Ruud here, he's contacting at about 7/100ths of a second. An even simpler way to do this is if we look at both views here, we look at the left, and then if we look at the right, you'll notice that's the peak of the ball toss, and notice where he's contacting. That ball has dropped maybe 9 inches or so, and he's contacting the ball. One of the most common issues that recreational and club players have is that the toss is way too high. When you toss higher, the ball falls faster through the air and it becomes more difficult to make a timing. Yes, you can make that timing again and again when you are just serving from a basket of balls, but to make a timing when the ball is falling really fast in a pressure situation, it's challenging. And again, if you can make that timing 10 times out of 10 and hit the appropriate serve, the one that you want, keep your high ball toss. But for most club and recreational players, the recommendation is try to bring the window from the peak to the contact to be a little bit lower. Another way it can help you out when it comes to things like when you're playing on a sunny day or the sun is exactly where you're tossing that ball. It will definitely help not having to stare up at the sun for, let's say, 1.25 seconds compared to only staring at it for 0.08 of a second. So that's one way. I know if you've been watching a few YouTube videos, especially on serving and improving your serve, the ball toss is something that's considered quite a lot. But think about the timing as well. Think about how high you're tossing, and having a toss that's not too high will definitely help to make your serve more consistent and help you to hit it more consistently into the court. Hey, if you're still watching, I'd appreciate if you think about liking and subscribing. It does help me to grow the channel. And if you've been enjoying my videos lately, please consider checking out my newsletter, The Fast 4. It's one actionable tip designed to improve your tennis in 4 minutes or less every Monday. The link for that will be in my description below. I'd love to have you there. Next thing that you can learn from Casper Ruud's serve mechanics is to do with what he's doing with his hand and his palm. So palm down is popularized today, but knuckles up is another way of thinking about it. Whatever works for you. If you can be in this palm down, knuckles up position, it'll just help with a few things. So one of the first is it'll be easier for you to move the racket from essentially right to left or get it to clear your head. So if we watch Casper Ruud's racket, the racket will clear his head and he goes into that external rotation into internal rotation, or the racket drop or the loop, whatever you want to call it. There's all sorts of different terminology, but it is an essential part of serving well. You have to learn to formulate that loop over your head. And another component here related to the palm down movement is, where is Casper Ruud's racket tip? So if we watch the tip of his racket, it's facing to the side fence. And I point this out because I have some recreational players who basically open up their palm. They fan the racket outwards and the tip of the racket will be facing more towards the back fence. There's lots of great servers who have the tip of the racket towards the back fence and they have their palm down. Someone like a Roger Federer, for example, later on in his career. However, what I often see with club and recreational players is that when that racket starts to go far away from their body and their hand starts to go far away from their body, they start to lose awareness of what it's doing. It tends to open up. And then we also lose this right to left movement that we see the best players essentially use on their serve. So if that's something you're struggling with, might be worth giving it a try, where you don't have your racket go all the way to the back fence, but essentially you just lift it with your palm downwards and you can lift it along the baseline. Try that out and let me know if it helps to stop you from opening up your racket face. And the next tip I want you to try and emulate, if you go and film yourself, is the separation that Casper Ruud gets between the segments of his body. So what do we mean by that? If I were to draw a line through his hips and then a line through his shoulders, you would see that his shoulders are turned more than his hips and his elbow is to the left of his body. In general, there are two types of rotation that you want on your serve. You want to have the quote-unquote shoulder over shoulder rotation. Another way you can think about it is how sharply upwards are your shoulders tilted. And the other rotation you want to have is transverse rotation, which is basically your shoulders turning more than your hips and then your hips turning a little bit more than your knees. And basically the idea is you just want to store energy throughout your entire body, so that when you come into the contact, you can just unwind those segments into the contact. Now, I'll give you the caveat. Of course, he's a professional player. He works all day on his body, his mobility, his strength, his power. You, as a club and recreational player, might not be able to get into this position. You might have mobility limitations that you need to address and think about. So whenever I work with players, one of the first things that I say when they tell me they want to improve their serve is, how is your body? Is it mobile? Are you strong? Do you have great range of motion? Are you able to generate power? And also, more importantly, are you willing to work with a qualified professional to really get your body into the right place to be able to hit the serve hard and well? So if we look at Casper Ruud here, you can see his shoulders turn more than his hips, and he just unwinds all of that energy into the contact. And finally, what you need to be aware of is what the non-hitting arm is doing at the contact. So some debate and discussion amongst, I guess you could say, teaching community about the serve being a throwing motion, a shot put motion, some debate about the shoulder over shoulder motion, etc., etc. However, what I just recommend here are my 2 cents. They might be worth a little less than 2 cents. It's essentially a throwing movement or mechanic, but the angle of the throw is way more upwards. It's not a forward throw, it's an upwards throw. So with any throwing mechanic, whether you're throwing a javelin or a baseball, one of the things that we will see is the non-throwing side really slows down. It'll slow down and act as essentially a reactive brake for the hitting side to move fast. So if we look at Casper Ruud here on the left, notice how his hand tucks in against the body, then the racket goes outwards fast as it comes into internal rotation, into the contact, and he lands inside the court. Why I'm pointing this out is because I have worked with some players who artificially try to create this movement they see at the end of their swing, where the non-hitting arm will fly back. But you just want to focus in on getting the non-hitting arm tucked in against the body at the contact so that the hitting arm can go really fast. I would say it's quite counterproductive to focus in on throwing your non-hitting arm backwards, because that's not what actually happens at the contact. You want to tuck the non-hitting arm against the body so that you can really have the hitting arm move fast.